On Tuesday, U.S. President Donald Trump delivered the longest State of the Union address in the nation's history. For nearly 2 hours, Trump spoke before a joint session of Congress, detailing the accomplishments of his administration's first year back in office and claiming that America is entering a golden age. The Democratic Party, in its rebuttal, accused Trump of misleading the American people. CGTN's Walter Morris has our report.
The President of the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump entering the United States Capitol Tuesday evening to deliver the first State of the Union address of his second term. Trump beginning the marathon speech by declaring America is back.
We finally have a president who puts America first. Put America first. I love America.
Trump's speech lasted 108 minutes, breaking his own record for the longest presidential address to Congress. During his remarks, he touched on the major pillars of his second-term agenda, like border security, tax cuts, and his widely disputed tariff-heavy foreign policy.
They will continue to work along the same successful path that we had negotiated before the Supreme Court's unfortunate involvement. So despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful, country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in.
Trump, in his address, vowed to never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and he was quick to blame Democrats for many of the U.S. economic challenges like inflation. At one point, 2 congresswomen shouting from the House gallery during a very animated exchange over the controversial immigration crackdown. Many high-profile guests like the gold-winning U.S. men's Olympic hockey team were in the audience during the State of the Union, along with wounded service members and several victims of the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Texas Congressman Al Green removed from the chamber while holding a sign that read, "Black people aren't apes."
I refuse to tolerate this level of hate that the president is in fact putting into policy. We must take a stand against this level of invidious discrimination. I wanted him to know, and I wanted him to see it and hear it up close. But judging from the expression on his face, he got the message. He saw it, he got the message.
And while Trump listed his accomplishments, a group of Democratic lawmakers skipping the State of the Union speech in protest, holding a rally near the Capitol.
His cruelty and his indecency, we are more divided now than at any time since the Civil War. Trump's promises have all been broken.
Trump closed his speech saying America is entering a golden age. Moments later, Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger delivered the Democrats' official response.
He's enriching himself, his family, his friends. The scale of the corruption is unprecedented. There's the cover-up of the Epstein files, the crypto scams, cozying up to foreign princes for airplanes and billionaires for ballrooms, putting his name and face on buildings all over our nation's capital. This is not what our founders envisioned, not by a long shot.
Walter Morris, CGTN, Washington.
To discuss the speech and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Maryland, Joel Rubin is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. Here in Washington, D.C., Frank Sesno is Professor of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University. From North Carolina, we're joined by Mary C. Curtis, who is a columnist at Roll Call and host of the Equal Time podcast. And in Delaware, Brandon Brice is a conservative columnist and secretary of the Delaware Republican Party. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Brandon, let me start with you. President Trump's State of the Union address focused largely on domestic issues, especially the economy, on things like immigration as well. He talked about his tax cuts. He talked about border security. It was, as I mentioned, the longest speech in the history of the State of the Union. What were your impressions?
You know, it was interesting. It was a long speech, but I also thought the president, it was one of the most honest speeches where the same thing that I would hear in a barber shop, I heard last night. He talked about the economy. He talked about what he's done for immigration. He's talked about the fact that, you know, some of the Democrats' policies have been anti-American. The fact that he had to ask the Democratic Party, do you support the Americans? Do you put Americans first? Or are you putting illegal, undocumented people first? And the fact that there was silence tells you where they stand, Anand. And so I thought the president's speech was right on last night. And, you know, it was interesting because one of the things that one of the criticisms that I heard was when he talked about tariffs, that, the Supreme Court was supposed to feel a certain way. The president doesn't control what the Supreme Court does. And so I thought the speech was right on. It's Trump style. So we knew the speech was going to be long, but this was Trump's really speaking to the world to say, I'm with you. The other party is against you.
Joel Rubin, what do you think? Was the president honest? Was he forthcoming with the American people? We should remember that his approval ratings have slipped, but he claimed credit for steering the country to what he called a golden age. He also blamed Democrats for everything that's going wrong.
Yeah, and forgive me for not noticing the golden age that he's talking about. I think it's up in his mind. Poll after poll demonstrates that the American people are feeling the strain of the affordability crisis. They're deeply concerned about the chaos in our streets and around the world the president is fostering. And they're also, as Governor Spanberger said, really unhappy with the corruption that they're seeing from this White House. And so, he spun a story. It was more like an awards show, basking in the glory of many Americans who've achieved great things and sort of trying to glom off of that, even saying that he should give himself the Congressional Medal of Freedom, another bizarre argument. And I think for the American people who want solutions, they will look at that speech and say, well, that was a campaign speech. That was partisan. There was nothing about unifying the country. There's nothing about a new economic policy now that the one he ran on has been torched by the Supreme Court. And that is not what a State of the Union should be. I'll close with this. The State of the Union should be about bringing the country together, about laying out a vision for how to make our lives better, not a bunch of gripes about the other political party.
Frank Sesno, Trump has a flair for theatrics. He's big on the stage. He baited the Democrats in some instances. They did fall for it. He called them sick and unpatriotic. But did you get the impression that this was more of a campaign speech than a State of the Union speech?
This was the Donald Trump show from start to finish. It was Donald Trump, the apprentice host. It was Donald Trump, the MC of the event. It was Donald Trump, the guy who says, I'm only constrained by my own morality. He owned the night, and he orchestrated accordingly. There were dial groups. There was an organization out west, out in Arizona, that was doing dial groups. So they had a focus group of viewers dialing in what they liked, what they didn't like. And what they liked the most was when he brought the hockey team, the U.S. hockey team with their gold medals down onto the stage. And Trump played to the rafters like that throughout the evening, both with the winners and, frankly, with the losers and the victims, as he pointed out. So that's what he was doing. What he wasn't doing, and I have been covering and watching and studying these speeches for decades now, what he didn't do was a deep dive into the policy issues. He didn't do a deep dive into foreign policy. That in the past has been a very substantial part of the State of the Union speeches that many presidents have given. And he didn't do any kind of deep dive into the I feel your pain about the economy, affordability, or whatever, for people who feel that, and for the very substantial numbers of people in polls who say that they're uncomfortable with his leadership in the economy. Only 26% of independent voters now say they approve of the president's rating. He did not address any of that criticism. It was the Donald Trump show, bringing in the hockey team and playing to the balcony in many ways, more than to the really tough issues that dog him.
Frank, why do you think that the president steered clear of any kind of policy prescriptions? These are times when one would have expected a president to unveil new policies to make the case for his party. There's a midterm election coming up, a very important midterm election for him. And we could be on the precipice of a war as well.
That may be what. Look, when I've, pay attention and cover these speeches, it's what the president says as much as what the president doesn't say. What the president didn't say last night was anything substantive about Ukraine. He never mentioned Russia or Vladimir Putin's name. He did not talk about China. And when he came to Iran, where the U.S. has a massive buildup and is contemplating, by every report, potentially significant military action, there was no substantive discussion about why, what was at stake, why we're going back after having supposedly obliterated Iran's nuclear capacity over the summertime when there was the first array of attacks. And he didn't talk about human rights in a significant way in Iran or elsewhere. So I think this was Trump being Trump, pounding what he considers are his successes, playing to his base, and they responded by what I've seen the day after, fundamentally positively. It was and the audience last night. This also we've seen from some of the ratings and results that are out, leaned I think 13 percentage points or so Republican. So he was talking to a more friendly crowd than a skeptical crowd.
Mary, good to have you with us. This was, of course, vintage Trump. I mean, it was a spectacle in many ways, made for television. He played to his supporters. He attacked the Democrats. But, you know, it was a speech, it seemed to be much more about theater than about substance. In fact, there was a comment from one Republican representative, Don Bacon from Nebraska, who said that he hoped that it would have been more unifying. It wasn't. What is your view?
Of course it wasn't. It was Donald Trump. It was vintage Trump. It was leaning heavy on reality show entertainment. He brought the hockey team on. He had the older veteran, but it also was light on policy that people are worried about. Governor Abigail Spanberger, her speech was 12 minutes, but it just asked the questions: do Americans feel safer? Do they feel that Donald Trump is working on the Americans' behalf? And is life more affordable? And that's what's on people's mind. But it's interesting because usually presidents come and they haven't asked for Congress what they want to do. Of course he didn't, because Donald Trump likes to do things unilaterally. So he's not going to cooperate. Also, presidents always talk about, I'm the president of everyone. He has never done that. He makes no bones about being about his base and now about donors and the donor class. He talked about victims of crime, but he didn't talk about the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, who were right there. He was very fact challenged. Even the one that I knew about Charlotte, when he talked about someone coming in from open borders, when the unfortunate murder of Irina Zaruska, actually, it was a citizen, someone who was very suffering from mental illness. And now they have new laws. If only they would give the resources for more judges and more counseling. And of course, he hit very hard on the voting issue, and that's looking to the midterms, talking about the SAVE Act, laying the groundwork that the only way we can lose is if Democrats cheat. And we can see everything that's been going on with the seizure of the Georgia ballots, with the threats to have armed ICE folks around voting places, with federal government trying to get all the data and take over. And earlier in the day, I had a press conference with some members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina, Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager Dove of California, and they talked about that particular piece of it a lot. How now this is being set up. It is nothing new. But we see this looking toward the midterms. And so it was vintage Donald Trump, not much substance, not a lot of policy, not any sign that he was going to work with Democrats who, let's face it, represent a lot of the American people. And, not many words about what's going to happen in Iran. How are folks, he talked about the stock market. Well, most ordinary folks are worrying more about the price of things that they buy every day. And he did not put a nod to that at all. So a big show, but afterwards, how is it going to help the American people?
Right. Okay, Brandon, he talked a lot about the economy. He came out with some numbers, but the numbers were different from what ordinary Americans face on the street. He mocked the use of the word affordability by Democrats, but let's look at some of the numbers. Inflation has slowed and gas prices are lower, but nowhere near below $2.30 a gallon or even $1.99 a gallon, which the president claimed. Grocery prices are up by nearly 2%, housing 6.8%, medical care 3.4%, and clothing almost 2%. Is this president out of touch with ordinary Americans?
Well, I wouldn't say he's out of touch. I think the challenge is I think he's making the American people his priority. Now, the reality is the guy's not going to change the numbers overnight. But again, this is what Donald Trump do. This is a showman. But one thing that I will say that his speech did enamor when we talk about the economy is he talked about jobs. He talked about putting people back to work. He talked about prioritizing Americans over illegal and undocumented workers. And let me also say from your last guest, the interesting thing is the president was very clear last night on who he was representing. The problem is I didn't hear that from the left. And Spamberger, when you talk about saying a whole lot to say nothing, to have a 12 to 15-minute speech, I thought that was really interesting, given the fact that this president, at least again, focused on the American people and focusing on turning the economy around. And so one of the challenges that I think where the disconnect is are the left, is the Democratic Party putting the American people's issues and needs first? And we didn't hear that last night. And matter of fact, some of the faction refused to stand for it. And so to me, Anand, when you talk about tariffs and all these other issues and the economy, that's concerning when you have a faction of the Democratic Party that is there to represent the people, but their policies don't reflect that.
Okay, Mary, what is your response to that?
Well, my response is that when you look even at the immigration numbers, nobody really wants violent criminals coming in and committing crimes against the American people. That is not anybody's agenda. I think what people feel, and it's even folks who support Donald Trump on immigration, the way this has been carried out. We have 2 U.S. citizens dead, well, 3, I guess, in Minnesota. You have folks breaking through doors without warrants, these kinds of things. I remember I've been covering this for a long time, and there used to be a fear that a Democratic president, Barack Obama, when I went to Tea Party conferences, he would be sending helicopters and breaking into doors and grabbing up U.S. citizens. And they had this "Don't Tread on Me" signs. Well, now actually these things are happening under a Republican president and a Republican administration. And I think even Donald Trump's supporters on immigration, many have been really probably, they're very skeptical about this, even having masked agents and federal agents who don't have the rules and regulations that ordinary police do every day. And they don't want to have anyone's rights, even immigrants deserve due process. That's the Constitution. And there's a lot of things in the Constitution that it seems that they're ignoring. Even federal judges appointed by Republican presidents, including Donald Trump, have complained that they are ignoring judicial orders.
Okay, Joel Rubin, I want to get back to that part of the speech that Brendan Brice talked about twice so far, when Trump tried to box Democrats into a corner, when he asked the assembled lawmakers there to stand if they believed that the job of a government is to ensure the safety of Americans. Well, of course, the Democrats did not stand, and then, in a way, they took the bait, because he then unloaded on them and called that particular incident, that episode, shameful. But how can Democrats respond to something like this?
Yeah, well, you're talking to a frustrated Democrat. I wish that the seats had been filled. I wish that our members of Congress and the Democratic side had attended and demonstrated what it means to be a leader in this country, and that the person speaking was not. But Democrats chose not to do that, putting themselves in the box, and we saw the result, which is a real kind of display that is antithetical to what Democrats are actually fighting for. And to your question, look, across the country in the last year, almost 90% of elections of key races have been won by Democrats. And that's not by accident. That's because Democrats are focusing on the issues that matter to people, focusing on healthcare, focusing on education, on childcare, focusing on affordability. And that is what is winning elections. And that's how Democrats win, and win the night overall. Unfortunately, the optics last night, I think that Trump did, quite frankly, win those optics, but that's a very ephemeral victory. That's not what's going to carry him in the Republican Party in November. It's going to be the blocking and tackling of good governance, and that's where Democrats are winning and coming out ahead.
Frank Sesno, Trump, we know, thrives on confrontation. He likes to be the bully on the playground. And in a sense, did Democrats take the bait? Because if we look at what the president did there, we had Representative Al Green holding up that sign about a racist video that the president recently posted on social media. We had Representative Ilhan Omar shout out, "You've killed Americans." This is a big night. The cameras are all all these people. It's a big platform. What did you make of it?
Just how raw nerves are in this country, just how divided and polarized we are. What the president didn't talk about last night was the ICE crackdown in the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis, where 2 Americans were shot dead as part of that. He didn't talk about people barging into doors and into homes. And he didn't talk. He tried to put a very positive gloss on the economy. But look, I've looked up here while we've been talking some of the stats. The stat is that job growth in 2025 last year was the weakest year for job growth since the pandemic. Some of the headlines: hiring slows in December. This is last December, weakest job growth since the pandemic. A grim picture of 2025. People are living that. New car in America now costs an average of $50,000. People are living that. There were more layoffs, 1.2 million workers last year, 58% increase from 2024. People are living that. So while there's a lot of culture war going on, and the Democrats and everybody else is very emotional over that and trying to figure out how to deal with that, and Trump is trying to ram through that, the issues that people are living, experiencing in their lives, whether it's cost of living and inflation or a sluggish job market. I work at a university. I will tell you, young people express deep concern. College-educated, graduating young people are very worried about getting jobs now. And so we're at this very fraught moment, and that, along with the emotion, is what we saw playing out last night.
Brandon, Brice, 2025, the weakest year for job growth. And to Joel Rubin's point that, look, it's great when you make these speeches and you play to the cameras, the optics look very good, but the reality is that Democrats have been winning elections, haven't they?
Well, they have. And I think this is one of the issues that I think is the problem, is not necessarily the president, but it's more how is his message resonating with those border states where immigration matters, or people are related to immigrants. And so we've seen this play out before. And I think this is where you may actually see some Republican senators push back, because at the end of the day, it's not the president, it's their own self-preservation. But let me also say this, Anand. One of the things from last night that was made very clear, the president talked about voting, and he talked about proof of citizenship. That, to me, should be a no-brainer, that you need to be able to prove that you're a citizen to vote in a U.S. election. But on top of that, one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that, when you talk about what fraud, the president talked about fraud last night in places like Minnesota. It's been crickets. And I think it's an issue of last night, the Democrats don't want to talk about their issues. They want to talk about the president's issues. And I think last night the president did a very good job of addressing the issues that people care about. And I can tell you this, again, I go back to the president's message last night was about supporting the American people and putting Americans first. That did not resonate with the left. And in my opinion, regardless of what you saw in Virginia and New Jersey, that should concern every American. And every American that watched that speech last night saw the same thing that we saw, is there's a faction of this country in Congress that is not putting the issues of the American people first, and we saw it last night.
Joel, during the speech, President Trump did talk about one piece of legislation, or proposed legislation, I should say, which appears to have bipartisan support, and that is it's called the Stop Insider Trading Act. There's a perception that members of Congress are using their position and access to privileged information to trade stocks. Is this something that enjoys support on both sides? But again, the president said that and then put the blame on Democrats.
It's not just a perception, it's a reality. There's a lot of that insider trading, and it's across the board. There are concerns as well about, for example, some people that may be out of the White House getting rich off of poly market prediction markets. Corruption in our system now is at an all-time high, at least in my living memory. And I think we've got a real problem. It's tied to campaign finance, of course, but the limitless money that can be dark money spent on political campaigns and the cozying up to billionaires as a result. Now we see the crypto corruption as well related to what Abigail Spanberger said last night. So you bet. It's across the board. It's in both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, and it undermines our democracy. And yes, Democrats did help to block that legislation in the past from getting through, but I don't think that that's just the Democrats' fault that it didn't get through. We've got major problems on corruption right now in our country.
Okay, Frank, I've just got a little bit of time left, but you've covered multiple presidencies. You reminded us of that a moment ago. In your career as a correspondent in Washington, also as bureau chief at CNN. Has there been a Trump before this?
Has there been a Trump before this?
Yes.
Well, there was a first-term Trump. No, not like this. Every president plays to the room, and they play to the balcony. Ronald Reagan did that. He started bringing people in. One time he brought in the U.S. budget and plunked it down, and that's where he famously said, government isn't the answer to our problems. Government is the problem. There's always theater as long as there's been cameras in the room like that, and presidents play to it. Not to this extent, not to this length, and I would say that even partisan presidents have tried to say through their State of the Union speeches in the past, I am president of all America. The state of our union is good. Always spin, but not like this, and not with the harshness and the divisiveness, to the point there are now some pundits saying maybe we should stop. The president shouldn't come up there for the State of the Union anymore. Just send us a letter. He's abused the hospitality that the Congress extends when they invite him. That is all. After all,
okay.
So,
that is where we need to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.